Hello everybody and welcome back to the HLTCO YouTube channel. Now I appreciate that this channel is not going to be Crystal Palace centric for the most part. You know, it is my bread and butter in terms of the club that I support. I record the daily Palace pods over on Patreon, and I as an individual will always be utterly obsessed with matters going on in SE25 and at Selhurst. That's just my day-to-day life. But I am acutely aware that a large chunk of the people that follow this YouTube channel are not going to be overly bothered about Crystal Palace news from day to day, so it's not as though the videos that I upload are going to be centred on Palace specifically. But in this particular instance, there have been plenty of Newcastle fans and football fans generally over the last 24 to 48 hours who have asked me over on Twitter, or X as it is now known, for an update in relation to Marc Guehi and the potential of him moving from Crystal Palace to St James's Park before the current summer transfer window is at its end. And, you know, I've given my opinion in written form over Twitter to a fair few people, but I think it sort of struck me over the weekend it would be a good idea to record a video just to lay out the basic situation as it is with Crystal Palace and Marc, and whether or not there is a likelihood of him moving to Newcastle by the time the window is closed. I think there has been a bit of a angry sort of conversation taking place between certain Palace and Newcastle fans, not just even over the last couple of weeks, but in general, because there seems to be this feeling from certain sections of the Newcastle fan base that Palace have got above their station. There's a certain feeling amongst Palace fans that Newcastle have developed this streak of, you know, we'll take your best players because we've got incredibly rich owners now. And I think, you know, sometimes, and it's often the case, isn't it? You know, the devil is in the detail. There is always nuance when it comes to these conversations. In relation to Marc Guehi specifically, the situation as far as Palace are concerned is as follows. He has a contract with us that runs until the summer of 2026. There is no release clause as part of that deal. He is therefore our player. We do hold the cards when it comes to any negotiating process. It is not similar to Michael Olise's contract, which saw him have a release clause activated by Bayern Munich for £50 million. He has now moved to the Bundesliga with the German Giants because he insisted when he signed initially his first contract with us from Reading that there would be a £35 million release clause in there, and when he signed his second one he insisted that there would be a £50 million release clause in there. That has now been met. He has moved on. Eze is another player on our books who has a release clause as part of his deal. It is significantly higher than Michael Olise's. I believe it's somewhere around 63 to 65 million pounds. I think there is also an extra clause in there that dictates that any purchasing club have to probably pay a chunk of the 15% sell-on clause as well as that initial fee. I appreciate again that Eze is not part and parcel of the Marc Guehi transfer saga, but it does feed into the general narrative when it comes to Crystal Palace's position within the market in this summer. You know, we have a pretty sizable chunk of money now. As much as we have spent money in this summer, Chadi Riyad has come in from Real Betis. You've got Daichi Kamada, who's arrived on a free transfer, albeit there will be a pretty hefty signing on bonus in there. You've got Ismail Assar, who's arrived from Marseille. But even if you look at the overall transfer spend from Crystal Palace up until now, it totals around £25 million. And you don't need to be a mathematical genius to realise that the Michael Olise money, the £50 million that we got pretty much all up front from Bayern Munich as well, is sitting there happily in the club's coffers. We were under no immediate pressure when it came to PSR, regs and everything else to even sell Michael. It would have potentially impacted our ability to do business within the market, but you know, it wasn't a case of us going with the begging bowl and making sure that we got that activated release clause for Michael Olise. And I think that has to be taken into account really when you discuss the potential of Marc Guehi moving away this summer. You know, there was a couple of articles over the weekend that said Crystal Palace's asking price for Marc Guehi is £70 million, and predictably there were all sorts of people in the replies and the quote tweets on Twitter laughing it off, saying it was ridiculous, saying that Crystal Palace are out of our minds for demanding that much money. I do not see it that way at all. You know, primarily we do not want to sell Marc Guehi in this window. That's the first and foremost most important part of this. Secondly, you look at his stock generally. You've got a 23, 24-year-old centre-back who has come to Crystal Palace for around £20 million from Chelsea, immediately embedded himself as part of the Premier League side from week to week. He has been ever-present. I would argue that he has very much the attributes of a future captain or even a current captain going into this season. Oliver Glasner oversaw an uptick in our form towards the back end of the previous campaign, albeit Marc didn't really play within that. But you look at the form that he has shown for England, next to John Stones, at the heart of the defence over in the European Championships in Germany. For many people, he was up there as one of, if not the best players for England across the European Championships. And whether you like it or not, that will see his general stock and the asking price from Crystal Palace rise. There is, of course, the elephant in the room that Marc Guehi himself has not at this point in time shown any willingness to enter conversations about a new contract at Crystal Palace, and that has to come into the thought process as well. But when you throw in the fact that Michael Olise has already gone, when you're looking at a manager in Oliver Glasner who has had such a sizable impact on Crystal Palace's first team across the 3 or 4 months that he was in charge at the back end of last season, and the ability for us, having finished 10th, to potentially push on and who knows, maybe even get 7th place in a position in the UEFA Conference going into the 25-26 season, I think that Crystal Palace themselves are acutely aware that if Marc Guehi across the next 12 months shows a complete reluctance to enter into contract negotiations with us, that we will have to bite the bullet and agree to a sale next summer. I'm not suggesting that he will not move this summer, but I do honestly believe that that £70 million fee, or very close to it, will be what Crystal Palace hold out for, because there is no need for us to sell at this point in time. There is no looming prospect of him leaving for free. There is no release clause. He is still very young. Now he has the extra degree of spotlight placed upon him thanks to his fantastic performances for England. You can expect that numerous pundits will be paying closer attention to him. There is the prospect of Liverpool and Arne Slot coming in and entering something of a bidding war next to Newcastle for Marc Guehi, depending on who you listen to in the media. And of course, you don't want to necessarily provoke teams to try and purchase your player, but it stands to reason if you've got Liverpool and Newcastle going head to head for Marc Guehi, then you can push the price up further. And I think this feeds into a greater narrative, really, because yesterday evening there was an article or a piece that was put out which referenced Adam Warton, who of course also went with Gareth Southgate in the England squad to the European Championships. Yes, he didn't get a single minute, but I think his notoriety within the game has skyrocketed across the last 6 months or so following his move to Crystal Palace from Blackburn. At 20 years old, he has established himself as a Premier League regular, someone who has wowed pretty much everyone who has watched him, someone who has a 5-year contract, who doesn't have a release clause, who, if he plays consistently well, to the same level or even close to it that he did in the 3 or 4 months for Crystal Palace at the back end of last season for a full campaign, who will command all sorts of interest and genuine, big money offers. And Crystal Palace have come out and said, if you want us to sell him this summer, you will have to put £100 million on the table. And again, people are scoffing. Now, I understand it from an expectation of what you would be willing to pay for a 20-year-old who has been in the Premier League for a matter of months. But why Crystal Palace, or indeed any other club outside of the established heavy hitters in the Premier League, should look to sell their players for less than that when they actively do not want to, I'm not sure. We all know that being part of the Premier League is worth tens of millions of pounds every single year, potentially into the 3 figures of hundreds of millions. And if you've got a player like Adam Warton who can continue to go from strength to strength, then I don't see why Crystal Palace should sell him for any less. If you were backed into a corner and he had, say, 18 months left to run on his deal, and you knew that he wasn't going to sign a new one, similarly to the situation with Marc Guehi, if that particular situation occurs across the next 12 months, then of course you do have to make a change. But right now, there is no reason why Crystal Palace should even enter into a conversation about selling Adam Warton unless it is for an astronomical sum of money. And similarly, the Marc Guehi situation is one which will come to a head, but people across Newcastle's fan base, across the weekend just gone, have been asking me about the likelihood of it. I think there is a very solid chance that he could move in this particular summer, but in terms of the fee you will have to pay, it will be close to 70 million, if not the full amount, and the vast majority of that as well will probably have to be given up front. That in itself is obviously something which enables Crystal Palace to be a bit more free and easy with our spending. There are all sorts of players across Palace's first team squad who could command sizable transfer fees, but I think the model in general is to make one big sale every summer. And if you go back to the start of this video, Michael Olise in this particular summer has been that player. But you throw in the ambiguity of Iberia Eze's release clause and whether or not that might be activated, we will not be able to stand in the way of Iberia Eze if someone comes along and activates that clause. And that in itself will put a moment of pause of thought in the back of the minds of Dougie Freedman, Steve Parish, Oliver Glasner and all the other stakeholders behind the scenes in SE25, because if you've got two star players leaving both on these release clauses and Marc Guehi does not have that, then you can stand firm, even if you are potentially cutting your nose off to spite your face in terms of his valuation in 12 months' time, should that situation come to pass. So hopefully this video has given a degree of clarity as to Crystal Palace's position in all of this. You know, I can't predict what is going to happen. It may well be that within 24 or 48 hours of me putting this up on YouTube, you know, he goes and signs for Newcastle and they come up with the money all the way through. And if that does happen, you know, so be it. But I do think you are going to have to pay a very, very hefty fee, with the majority of it up front, if you are going to land that particular transfer. And at this state, I'm not sure that any club, whether it be Newcastle, Liverpool or any other potential Premier League side, are going to put that much money on the table for Marc Guehi in the summer of 2024. Other than that, there isn't a great deal more that I wanted to add on that subject, so hopefully it's been relatively informative for you, and I will look forward to seeing you again later on this week. Cheers.